What if a single question could reveal whether you're truly living or just drifting? Friedrich Nietzsche, one of history's most provocative thinkers, believed there's one question so powerful, it can shake you to your core and transform how you see your life. It's not about success, money, or even happiness. It's about whether you can face your own existence with absolute honesty. Nietzsche's first keynote centers on a question that seems simple at first, but becomes profoundly unsettling the more you sit with it. If you had to live this life again and again, in the exact same way, would you embrace it? This thought experiment, known as the doctrine of eternal recurrence, is not meant to be a literal claim about the universe endlessly repeating itself, though Nietzsche sometimes entertained it as a cosmic possibility. Instead, it functions as a psychological and ethical test, a mirror held up to the soul. It asks you to look at your life not as something temporary or disposable, but as something you must own completely, without escape, without editing, without erasing. Imagine every choice you have made, every action you have taken, every joy, every mistake, every moment of pain and love being lived again exactly as it was, an infinite number of times. Nothing could be altered, nothing could be undone. Could you say yes to it? Could you embrace it without resentment? This question does not merely demand reflection. It forces a confrontation with the raw truth of how you are living. Most people live as though life is a draft, as though they can try things out, waste time, or push off important decisions for later, imagining that somehow the real life will begin tomorrow. Nietzsche explodes this illusion by presenting you with the possibility that there is no later, only repetition. Your life, exactly as it has been, is your eternal companion. In posing the question, Nietzsche makes you face the weight of existence itself. It is easy to live thoughtlessly when you imagine that mistakes fade away with time. It is harder when you realize that in this experiment, nothing fades, nothing disappears. It all comes back over and over, in an endless cycle. The purpose of this thought is not to crush you with despair, but to reveal whether you are living authentically. If you recoil in horror at the idea of living your life again, if you feel trapped by it, it may be a sign that you are not living as you truly want to live. It is a test of your relationship with your own existence. A life that you would willingly live again, despite all its hardships, is a life that has been affirmed. A life you would dread to repeat is a life you may need to rethink, recreate, or reclaim before it is too late. The question, therefore, is not abstract philosophy. It is an urgent challenge. It brings you face to face with your values, your choices, and your capacity to embrace life fully. Nietzsche was not asking us to pursue pleasure without pain or to craft a perfect life devoid of suffering. He was asking something deeper. Can you look at your entire life, with all its darkness and all its light, and still will it, still affirm it, still desire it to return again? That requires more than happiness. It requires strength, courage, and acceptance. For Nietzsche, the ability to embrace this eternal recurrence is a sign of greatness. It is the mark of someone who has learned to say yes to life, someone who no longer hides from the tragedies, failures, or chaos of existence, but instead uses them as material for growth. The question becomes a measure of your inner freedom. Are you shaping your life into something you would choose again, or are you letting life shape you into something you regret? Nietzsche's second keynote reveals why his question of eternal recurrence is not just a curious puzzle, but a radical test of life itself. When he asks whether you could embrace living your life again and again in exactly the same way, he is not trying to describe a hidden truth about the structure of the universe. He is confronting you with a way of measuring your own existence. The weight of this thought experiment lies in the fact that it strips away all illusions of escape or second chances. It demands that you look at your life exactly as it is, without any edits, without the hope of erasing mistakes or waiting for a fresh start. The moment you place yourself inside this scenario, you are forced to ask, am I living in such a way that I could will it forever? If not, what am I doing with my time? The radical nature of this test lies in how it redefines value. Most people think about their lives in terms of progress, goals, or the possibility of change. They imagine that tomorrow they will become better, stronger, or freer than they are today. Nietzsche's question throws that assumption into doubt. If you had to live this day with all its struggles, flaws, and minor triumphs an infinite number of times, could you affirm it? Suddenly, the future you were banking on becomes irrelevant. What matters is not some distant reward or later correction, but how you are living right now. The test brings all of your attention crashing back to the present moment. where the truth of your life is being played out in every decision, every word, every action. By posing this question, Nietzsche offers a tool for uncovering how deeply you are aligned with your own existence. Imagine, for example, a life full of compromises, where you pursue a career you despise, remain in relationships that drain you, or bury your dreams under fear of failure. In ordinary circumstances, you might endure these things with the thought that someday it will all pay off, or that eventually things will change. But in the thought of eternal recurrence, there is no someday. The compromises would return endlessly, the same mistakes repeated forever. That realization can sting like a wound because it forces you to see your life stripped of illusions. It shows you whether you are truly creating a life worth repeating, or whether you are avoiding the truth about what you really desire. Yet Nietzsche's radical test is not purely negative. It is not meant to paralyze you with regret, but to awaken you to the urgency of living authentically. If the thought of living your life again terrifies you, it is a call to transform it. If it fills you with strength, it is a sign that you are living in alignment with your values. The test becomes a kind of existential compass. It pushes you to ask whether you are living fully enough, deeply enough, courageously enough that you could say yes to eternity. It is not about finding comfort or chasing shallow happiness, but about shaping a life that is so deeply yours that you would embrace it without hesitation, regardless of how many times it returns. This is why Nietzsche considered the thought of eternal recurrence to be a supreme challenge. It strips away all excuses and reveals whether you are a creator of your own values or a passive follower of the herd. It takes away the safety nets we often cling to, forcing us to confront whether our life is genuinely ours. To face this question honestly is to see your existence under the harshest light imaginable, but it is also to gain the possibility of creating a life that can withstand that light. Nietzsche's test is radical because it does not allow you to escape into dreams, promises, or future salvation. It demands that you live so fully in the present that you could will it, not once, but forever. Nietzsche's third keynote challenges the way most people move through life, often unconsciously, as part of what he called the herd. Human beings, he observed, have a strong tendency to conform, to adopt the values, habits, and beliefs of those around them, without ever questioning whether those values truly belong to them. It is easier and more comfortable to follow paths that are already laid out, to accept traditions handed down by society, family, or culture, than to stand alone and create meaning for oneself. The one question of eternal recurrence, the demand to consider whether you would willingly live your life over again, exposes this passivity. If your life is a mere repetition of routines and borrowed values, then in Nietzsche's eyes, you are not living authentically. You are simply acting out a script that was written for you, and the thought of repeating it forever might fill you with dread. Authenticity for Nietzsche meant daring to live in a way that reflects your deepest will, not the expectations of others. Most people never attempt this because it requires courage. It is safer to remain in the comfort of the herd, to do what is familiar, to pursue goals that society rewards. The eternal recurrence is like a hammer that smashes this comfort. It forces you to ask, if this is the life you will live for all eternity, is it truly yours? Would you willingly embrace it, or would you recoil at the realization that your days are filled with compromises and borrowed ideals? To answer yes, you must begin to shape a life that reflects your own creativity and strength, not the hollow demands of conformity. The challenge of authenticity is not about rejecting all rules or relationships, but about examining them to see whether they are genuinely aligned with who you are. Many people, for example, take up careers, religions, or lifestyles simply because those around them did, never stopping to consider whether those choices express their own will. In the test of eternal recurrence, such borrowed lives reveal themselves as empty. The question demands honesty. Could you endure living these choices forever? If not, then perhaps you are living in bad faith, denying your own freedom to choose. Nietzsche's challenge is brutal in its simplicity because it cuts through all justifications. It asks only whether your life, exactly as it is, could be embraced infinitely. If the answer is no, then change is not just advisable, but necessary. This is why Nietzsche often spoke of the task of becoming who you are. Authenticity is not a gift handed to you, but a lifelong process of creation. It requires breaking free from inherited values and daring to form your own. It requires a kind of rebellion against the ease of imitation and the comfort of mediocrity. To become authentic is to step into uncertainty, to face suffering and loneliness, but it is also to gain the freedom to affirm your life fully. The eternal recurrence becomes both a test and a guide in this process. It reveals whether you are living for yourself or for the crowd, and it dares you to take responsibility for shaping your own destiny. Nietzsche's challenge of authenticity is not gentle. It is a demand for radical self-honesty. Most people will not accept it because it strips away illusions of safety. But for those who do, it becomes a source of immense power. To live authentically, in such a way that you could will your life again and again, is to transform existence into an act of creation. It is to say yes not only to your joys but also to your struggles, because they are part of the life you have chosen. It is to step out of the herd and into your own path, where your values, your struggles, and your victories are truly yours. Nietzsche believed that only those who dare to face this challenge can achieve the fullness of life that the eternal recurrence demands. Nietzsche's fourth keynote deals with the unavoidable presence of suffering in life and how the question of eternal recurrence forces us to rethink our relationship with pain. For him, suffering was not an accident to be avoided at all costs, but an integral part of existence and even of growth. To live is to encounter hardship, failure, loss, and struggle. The one who asks whether they could embrace their life again and again is also being asked whether they can affirm not only the moments of joy, but also the moments of despair, humiliation, and tragedy. Eternal recurrence does not permit us to edit our past, to remove the difficult chapters, or to pretend they never happened. It presents the totality of life, its beauty and its brutality, as something that must be willed and accepted. The question becomes, can you love your life so deeply that you would even choose to relive its darkest nights? Most people think of happiness as the absence of pain, imagining that the good life is one where suffering has been minimized or eliminated. Nietzsche rejects this as an illusion. For him, suffering is woven into the fabric of growth, creation, and transformation. The individual who wishes to overcome themselves, to grow into someone greater, must endure trials. Pain becomes the raw material of strength. Without challenge and hardship, there is no depth, no resilience, no greatness. Eternal recurrence forces you to see this clearly. If you cannot embrace the suffering in your life, you cannot embrace your life at all, because the two are inseparable. To affirm life fully is to affirm suffering as well. This perspective turns the problem of pain into a test of character. Weakness seeks escape, wishing for life without its burdens, longing for comfort above all else. Strength, however, learns to transmute suffering into meaning, to turn wounds into wisdom and loss into creative fire. Nietzsche admired figures who could take their pain and transform it into art, philosophy, or action. The eternal recurrence demands this attitude. It does not ask you to love pain for its own sake, but to see it as necessary, as something that shapes who you are. If you would not accept your suffering, you would not accept yourself, because you are inseparable from the trials that have made you. Consider, for instance, how often people say, "I wish that had never happened," when thinking of a mistake or a tragedy. Nietzsche's question denies this comfort. In the thought experiment, those events are permanent, inescapable, eternally recurring. The only way to meet them without despair is to embrace them as essential to your story. This requires a radical shift of perspective. Instead of seeing suffering as an enemy, you begin to see it as a teacher. Instead of resenting pain, you begin to affirm it as part of the fullness of existence. Only by doing so could you say yes to the eternal recurrence, yes to life in its totality. For Nietzsche, this ability to affirm suffering is one of the highest forms of strength. It is not naive optimism, not the shallow denial of pain, but a courageous acceptance that life is both cruel and magnificent. The challenge is to live in such a way that even the harshest experiences become part of a story you would choose to repeat forever. This requires not only resilience but also creativity, the ability to take pain and make something of it, to turn it into a source of depth rather than despair. Eternal recurrence reveals whether you have cultivated this power. If you recoil from your suffering, you recoil from life itself. But if you can embrace it, you transform suffering into a source of affirmation, and you prove yourself capable of the kind of strength Nietzsche believed defines a truly awakened human being. Nietzsche confronts the tendency humans have to evade responsibility by blaming circumstances, fate, or the influence of others for the shape of their lives. The question of eternal recurrence does not allow for such evasions, because it traps you in the reality that your life, as it is yours. Every choice, Every compromise, every missed opportunity, and every triumph belongs to you alone. And if you had to live it endlessly, there would be no one else to credit or condemn. This thought strikes directly at the heart of how we often seek to lighten the weight of existence. We tell ourselves that we had no choice, that society pushed us in a certain direction, that bad luck or injustice held us back. Nietzsche's radical test strips these narratives away. If your life had to be lived again and again, every excuse would lose its power because nothing would change. You are forced to confront that the shape of your existence is ultimately in your hands. To live without excuses is not to deny the reality of external forces. Nietzsche was not blind to the fact that people are shaped by their environment, their culture, and their historical moment. But he insisted that true strength is shown in how one responds to these conditions. Some people allow circumstances to dictate who they are, while others use them as a stage upon which to assert their will. Eternal recurrence forces you to ask, are you living as a creator? Someone who takes responsibility for shaping meaning in the face of what life gives you, or as a passive being, someone who lets life happen and then explains it away with excuses. To answer yes to the question of reliving your life forever is to claim ownership of it completely without blaming fate or others. It is to stand before existence and say, this is mine, I chose it, I affirm it. The weight of this demand can be overwhelming. Many people recoil at the idea because it feels unbearable to take such responsibility. It is easier to imagine life as something that happens to us rather than something we are actively creating. Excuses provide a cushion against regret. They soften the sting of realizing we are not living the way we want to. But Nietzsche believed that this comfort comes at the cost of authenticity. The more you hide behind excuses, the further you drift from becoming who you are. Eternal recurrence makes excuses impossible, because if you had to live everything again eternally, even the smallest choices would return. There would be no one else to blame, only the necessity of facing what you have done and who you have become. This does not mean living without mistakes. Nietzsche never envisioned the strong individual as someone flawless or infallible. Rather, strength lies in the ability to own mistakes, to transform them into part of your story, and to embrace them as necessary elements of your life. To take responsibility for your life is to say that even your failures are yours, and that without them you would not be who you are. This attitude turns regret into acceptance and weakness into fuel for growth. It eliminates the fantasy of starting over from nothing, and instead teaches you to value the raw material of your existence, no matter how imperfect. Living without excuses also demands freedom. You cannot affirm your life if you are merely copying the desires of others or living according to someone else's script. Responsibility requires you to recognize your power to choose, even when those choices are difficult or costly. It means daring to act in alignment with your own values rather than hiding in the safety of conformity. Eternal recurrence does not test whether you have lived a life that pleases others, but whether you have lived a life you could willingly repeat forever, with full responsibility for every detail. To meet this test is to embody the kind of strength Nietzsche admired, the strength of an individual who can face the weight of existence without excuses, without resentment, and with the courage to say yes to life as it is. Nietzsche centers on the power of saying yes to life in its entirety. This is the culmination of the thought of eternal recurrence, the ability not only to endure existence, but to affirm it so completely that you would willingly choose it again and again, endlessly. To say yes in this way is not a shallow optimism, not a denial of pain, and not a forced cheerfulness. It is a profound act of strength that embraces both joy and suffering, both triumph and failure, as necessary and inseparable parts of what makes life worth living. Nietzsche believed that this capacity to affirm existence without reservation is one of the highest expressions of human freedom and greatness. When most people think of acceptance, they often mean resignation, enduring what cannot be changed while secretly wishing it were otherwise. Nietzsche's yes is different. It is not passive but active, not resignation but affirmation. The one who can face eternal recurrence with a wholehearted yes is someone who has learned to love life in such a way that even its harshest trials are seen as integral to its beauty. Such a person does not merely tolerate existence. They celebrate it. They have found a way to transform suffering into meaning and limitation into possibility. By saying yes to life as it is, they release themselves from resentment, from longing for another world. and from the illusion that salvation lies somewhere beyond this moment. Everything needed for affirmation is already here. This radical yes requires a transformation in how we view ourselves and the world. To most people, pain, failure, or loss appear as obstacles to happiness. Nietzsche asks us instead to view them as threads woven into the tapestry of life, without which the whole design would be incomplete. The eternal recurrence magnifies this insight because it forces us to imagine reliving these hardships forever. If we can still embrace life under such conditions, then we have truly said yes. The ability to affirm even the most difficult experiences means we have learned to see them not as meaningless cruelties but as necessary parts of our becoming. Every scar, every trial, every moment of despair is transformed into an indispensable element of the life we affirm. Nietzsche often described this attitude as the ultimate expression of strength. The weak soul says no to life, either by rejecting it outright or by retreating into fantasies of another world, whether it is heaven, utopia, or some imagined future where suffering disappears. The strong soul says yes, not because life is easy, but because it is real, and its very difficulty is what gives it depth and value. This yes is what liberates a person from bitterness and allows them to live with creativity and courage. It is not that they no longer feel pain or regret, but that they can integrate those feelings into a larger affirmation of existence. Their life becomes something they would choose eternally, not because it is perfect, but because it is theirs. The power of saying yes also carries an ethical dimension. If you can affirm your life fully, you are less likely to live passively, less likely to waste your time on what is trivial or false. You begin to act with greater intentionality, knowing that each moment is one you might be called to relive forever. This does not paralyze but awakens, filling life with urgency and depth. Every action matters, every choice shapes the whole, and in saying yes you accept responsibility for the entirety of your being. Nietzsche's ultimate challenge is not to imagine a better world, but to will this one, in all its chaos and imperfection, again and again. The one who can say yes to that has reached a state of affirmation that transcends despair and embodies the highest freedom. So, in the end, Nietzsche's challenge is not a riddle about time or the universe. It is a challenge about you. The question of eternal recurrence asks whether you are living in such a way that you could embrace your life again and again, without excuse, without regret, without wishing it away. It is not about erasing suffering, but about transforming it into strength. It is not about waiting for tomorrow, but about saying yes to today. Most people will never face this question honestly. Most will drift, follow the herd, and cling to excuses. But Nietzsche believed that a few would dare to confront it, to take responsibility for their existence, to shape a life so real and so true that they could affirm it forever. The question is whether you will be among them. Can you look at your life as it is, with all its scars and all its beauty, and say with courage, "Yes, I would live this again"? That, Nietzsche tells us, is the power that can change your life.